So now we're going to go from entering bills, which we do when the bill comes in or when the item's delivered and we have that information, to now we're actually going to sit down and pay our bills. So this is what the pay bills window looks like. And so what would normally be here, this would be all of the different, this is not a vendor specific window. This would show all the bills that we owe. And we can set it to be due on or before a particular date, or we can have it show all bills. And then in order to select what we were going to pay, we would go through and just check these. And then it would automatically populate with the amount that's due. If we were going to pay less than the amount that was due, we could then go in and edit this field to just make a partial payment. And so we'll move over and do that in a second. And again, this is only going to be something that you're going to use to pay existing bills. You cannot simultaneously enter and pay a bill from that window. You would have to first go in and enter the bill, then you would go here to then pay the bill. And so now that we are, sorry, I keep moving this thing around so you can see. But now that we are going to pay the bill, if we look at it again back from the lens of our double entry accounting system, our accounts payable is now going to be debited and our credit is to cash because now we're paying, or it is reducing our cash. And we know that every time we perform a transaction that results in the decrease of an asset, which cash is, it is a credit entry. So I talked you through on that other screen, and you can pause this here and read this slide as you want, if you want, but this is the process that you would go through to pay the bill in full. You can also decide how you want to deal with the check numbers. So for the most part, you're probably going to be printing your checks in addition to, as you're doing this, as opposed to manually writing your checks. It's possible, and not the best practice, that a bill needed to get paid, somebody wasn't around who had access to the QuickBooks, so somebody with signing authority went and pulled the check out of the check stock, manually wrote a check, and now somebody's coming in later to now make that entry in your QuickBooks so that your check's there. If you are printing the checks simultaneously with paying the bills, then QuickBooks is going to know what check number comes next, and you're just going to let QuickBooks make that assignment for you. If, however, somebody has taken a manual check and gone and paid somebody and written it out by hand, you're going to need to make sure that the proper check number gets assigned to that transaction. And so I will just, this is basically talking you through what I will just go through, and I'm going to not hop onto that yet. So let's stop here, go over to the live version and pay some bills, which we don't actually have yet. Because I haven't done the homework for this week, nor do I plan to, we don't have any bills to pay in here, but I can at least show you where that information would show up. Bills from the drop-down menu here, or directly from your vendor center screen here. And again, this would show, we would have, rent, phone bill, whatever, all of these down here. We would have all of the various information that we had would all show up here. We could choose to filter this list and either choose all bills or bills before a certain date. But we then make the decision, and it won't let me check anything in here because I don't have any data in here. But it will allow, and then if we can decide how we're going to, if we're going to pay this by check, by credit card, but probably by check. but maybe not. And then we can either assign the check number manually because we've already written the check and it's gone, or we can print it and then QuickBooks will not just assign it, it will ask us first. It will say, this is going to assign it to check number 1272. And from an internal control standpoint, the very first thing I do before I print my checks is I'm still holding the check in my hand when that screen pops up and says check number 1272. The first thing I do is I look at that very top check in that pile and make sure that's 1272. If for some reason that says it's 1271 and I'm holding 1272, 1271 has disappeared someplace. And I am not doing one more thing unless I find check number 1271. Missing checks is the hallmark sign of fraud. And if you are a really good fraudster or you have one in your office, they will not take the top check. They will take a check from the middle of the pile. So it could take you months before you, if you don't check that regularly, before you work your way down and that missing check just reveals itself. But this is, if you don't go in and check periodically that your check stock is all complete, this is how you're going to find out. Is you go to print a check and the number that QuickBooks thinks you're printing is different than the physical check that you've taken off the top of the pile. And so again, all of this stuff I think is pretty clear. So I'm not going to spend a lot more time on it. And hopefully as you're doing the assignments in your book and at the chapter, this will become pretty clear. But I'm going to stop here and go over to the Write Checks window. So now we're at the Write Checks window. And you might say to yourself, well, what's the difference between this and the Pay Bills window? This is basically a simultaneous, you're presented with something you have to pay and you're going to pay it on the spot. Or maybe you're not even presented with it. You've run out of copy paper and somebody's got to go to Staples and buy copy paper. So they take a check and they go and they do it then. You're not going to come back and then enter a bill, pay a bill. This is where you're going to enter the check that has been written, or that you're going to write. You could also, if you know the amount, sometimes I'll send a staff person, if I have one, to go pick up something and I already know the amount. So I will pre-write the check, do all that stuff, print it out, sign it, say, here, go deliver that check. And pick up my print supply order, let's say, letterhead's done being printed. They call, they say, yeah, it's, $100, and I can have that check made out and have somebody go and do that. And then it's not something I have to worry about. So this would be the way to do that. If it's a check that's already written, I can assign the check number of the check I manually wrote. However, you would leave this field blank if you want QuickBooks to assign the check number as it's printing. So if you put a number in here, QuickBooks will not print the check. It will assume that that's a check that's already been written and it will just save it and move on. Unless you can force it to, but it's not going to just do that automatically. If you, however, leave this field blank, QuickBooks will say, hey, I'm supposed to print a check here. So I will assign that check number as I do that. And again, you would print, whoops, I forgot I wasn't in the live version. This is where you will print your checks. You can save them and print them later. You can also use this to make a payment online. And this is where you would just record that information. So if you make the payment online, it's not going to prompt you to print a paper check because it's going to assume that you're going to make that payment electronically without a paper check. You can hit save there, new there, or you can do save and new here, save and close. But to the extent that you have used this vendor before and there is a field that you can hit in the setup window for this, it will automatically suggest what goes into your field down here. And so, mine, for example, I can type in my landlord's information and it will automatically put down here rent expense. But again, that's a preference. And when we get into company setup later, I'll show you where you can establish those preferences. And so you can pause and read this, but this is basically what I just talked about as to when you would use the write checks window. When you are writing a check, back to our double entry accounting, again, the fields that you enter in below, this is going to be your debit, your asset, your expense, your drawing. So this is going to be, in this case, it's a janitorial expense. It is automatically going to credit your cash because that's what writing a check does, is it reduces your cash. And there would be, I can't envision a reason why you would ever change that default. And let's see, I'm going to just pause here. We're back in the live version, and I just wanted you to show you where to get that write checks window from. So in this case, rather than going to your vendor center, because we can write checks for lots of different things that have nothing to do with vendors, you're going to go to your banking window. Your first drop down is going to be write checks. And lo and behold, there it is. Now it doesn't recognize Computer Town, but I would indicate whatever we were buying, which you will be doing in your homework. And so this is a print later. And I guess I was going to show you how to print. So print your check. Oh, whoops, it's blank. Okay, let's just for sport. And this has nothing to do with your homework. I have no idea. This is just a nuisance transaction. So see, it recognizes check number 1 is going to be the next thing we print. We would hit OK, and lo and behold, check number 1 would come spewing out of our printer. And so I am going to, and you heard that little sound. There was a little tone. That tells me that transaction recorded. So I will go back in and delete that transaction and make sure that we did. Okay. So we are going to delete that. Yes, I want to delete this transaction. And the little sound is, that's the delete sound. So the 2 tones are the record sound and the sound is the delete sound, if you have your speakers turned on anyway. So I'm now going to stop this video and we'll finish up the final video with reports.